So before I begin tonight's words, I'd like to start with a quick little Shechianu moment to acknowledge that this is the first time the three of us are sharing the pulpit together, the bima together, since October. Due to travel and Rabbi Berezin's amazing sabbatical. And truth be told, moving forward, you're going to see less of the three clergy on the bima at the same time, in part because we're continuing to bring more worship opportunities to our community in our building and elsewhere. And so there'll be less times for the three of us to share this bima together. So I'd just like to acknowledge just how special it is on this Shabbat for all of us to be gathered here. Now, where to begin? So as many of you know, I grew up in the state of Texas. I'm certainly obnoxious enough about that. But what you may not realize is that before my time in Texas, my father had a congregation for 4 years in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. As a matter of fact, during that time, that was where my brother was born, and that's probably why I do, to this day, still have an affinity for Cajun food. During the time growing up in Louisiana, my father served as faculty at the Henry S. Jacobs Camp in Mississippi. I don't have very many memories of my time at Jacobs Camp, even though I was a staff brat back then. I was kind of young, but I do remember a couple of very distinct things. One is I remember that they had horseback riding, which now Osru is the only URJ camp left that has horseback riding. Even Green and Jacobs got rid of theirs. And I also remember distinctly having those little boxes of sugar cereal, because my house growing up was very much against sugar cereal. We had the illustrious children's favorite, Raisin Bran. And so, of course, I have fond memories of going to visit my friend growing up in Houston, where they had all the cereals. And so what I would do is I'd combine all of them into one bowl and call it a kamikaze, and it took me about 3 days to come down from that sugar high. So that was my first memory of Mississippi. Then fast forward much, much, much later, and following my ordination, we had a year left of Joy's residency at Cincinnati Children's, so I was not quite ready to go into placement. So instead, I found a High Holy Day pulpit, which was in Vicksburg, Mississippi. Now, at that point that I was serving them for the High Holy Days, and I've got some great stories about that brief time there were about 10 members left. And they had introduced me to the youngest member of the congregation who had just retired. However, in their heyday, they were a much larger congregation and community because a number of Jews migrated from the Northeast to the South, many as merchants, and they established congregations throughout the Southeast and the South, some of which still stand to this day, and some of which are celebrated through the Institute for Southern Jewish Life, which was created by Macy Hart following his retirement as director of Henry S. Jacobs Camp. Now, the Institute for Southern Jewish Life, they do a number of things. One is they collect memorabilia from all of these congregations, many of which are slowly disappearing, some of which were served by student rabbis out of Cincinnati, and they are housed in the largest congregation in Mississippi, which is in Jackson, which is Beth Israel, which, as Rabbi Berezin mentioned, was the victim of an arson attack this past week. Now, Beth Israel, like our community, our beloved community, is over 150 years old. Unlike our community, this is the second time that Beth Israel has been attacked. They had a rabbi, Rabbi Perry Nussbaum, who spoke out quite radically in his community in Mississippi in the 60s against racial injustice. And in 1967, the KKK firebombed the building, destroying the rabbi's office. And to add insult to injury, they then went and firebombed his home. Thankfully, no one was hurt. Unfortunately, Beth Israel is familiar with anti-Semitic violence and is familiar with the damage fire can cause. Already they're in the process of rebuilding, and if you are interested, you can certainly donate. We'll be sending out the link this week. My apologies for not getting it sooner if you're interested in contributing to this effort to rebuild and support this amazing and thriving community, the largest congregation in the entire state of Mississippi. And so I thought tonight, based off that news, I was going to spend tonight talking once again about anti-Semitism. Feels like ever since really Tree of Life, that's become a center of my conversations with communities that I've served. But other things happened. As many of you read about, and if you haven't, you've been emailed about the news of the desecration of our own cemetery. Regardless of whether it was a prank or somebody acting in a much more insidious fashion, the result is the same, that our cemetery has been damaged and sacred markers have been destroyed. We will rebuild, and we are certainly going to have to work on beefing up security, but once again, the cost of Jewish life is going up as we're going to have to find ways to continue to protect our sacred places. And more than that, we continue to still reel from the news out of Venezuela. We follow the news of the protests and violence in Iran, where people are desperately seeking a modern and democratic Iran and to remove a repressive regime. As Rabbi Berezin mentioned, we were at a retreat for faculty at Osrui, Sunday through Tuesday for me. She got back Wednesday. And we were talking with our colleagues from Minnesota in the sacred work they are doing and the difficult challenges they and their communities are facing. All of this with the heaviness of what's going on in the world, and even though it's been 100 days since a ceasefire in Gaza, it still feels very heavy. And I was thinking about that in terms of our Torah portion this week, Parashat Vayera. Part of it we know really well. In it we find the first 7 plagues of blood, frogs, lice, swarms, death of livestock, boils, and hail, which we reenact every year at our Passover Seder, removing drops of wine or grape juice from our cups. We read about the 4 promises of redemption, which are reenacted through the 4 cups of wine when we celebrate and read from the Haggadah. But there is another part of it that maybe we don't remember as well, which is Moses, who we tend to look at the lens through the entirety of Torah, was a reluctant leader. Every time God called to him, Moses gave an excuse, a reason why he was the wrong person. And finally, he does one last attempt, saying, Ki chavad peh uchvad lashon. I am not a man of words. I am slow of speech and heavy of tongue, which has traditionally been interpreted to say that he had a speech impediment. Matter of fact, there's a midrash that explains it, that when Moses was little and being raised in Pharaoh's palace, Pharaoh recognized that Moses could be a political threat. And so he put him on his lap and he put forth a test. There was a crown placed before him and a burning rock placed before him. And the Pharaoh knew that if Moses went after the crown, Moses would seek to usurp him and Pharaoh would kill him immediately. So as Moses began to crawl towards the crown, Angel and Michael swooped down and turned him towards the stone. And as he grabbed the stone, it was so hot to comfort himself, he placed it in his mouth, thus burning his tongue, making him heavy of speech, heavy of tongue, making it difficult to say the words he wanted to say. But God did not buy this excuse. God said, if you cannot speak, or if you have trouble speaking, I will send Aaron, your brother, who will stand beside you and speak for you. And together they then went and spoke to the Israelites, and they spoke to Pharaoh. That's the beginning of our redemption story. But I was thinking about that because there's another way, in my mind, to think about the idea of being slow of speech and heavy of tongue. Perhaps he was not suffering from a speech impediment, but maybe the heaviness of his tongue is lashon, was really the heaviness of his lev, of his heart. For me, today was one of those days. Usually I get up, I get the kids going, get the house ready for the day, I go to the gym, to the JCC, get in my workout, I lift heavy things, and then I come home and I get ready for the day. I then come here to the office, say hi to the mahjong ladies, then go through my emails, my voicemails, make phone calls, and get ready for Shabbat, oftentimes writing a sermon, preparing for Torah study, preparing for a bat mitzvah. But today, I'll be honest, I was heavy of heart. I went to the store, I had a Zoom with some colleagues, and then I worked with Jeff and staff on our response to the recent news out of our cemetery. And then I was done. Hichvad peh uchvad lashon. My mouth was heavy because my heart was heavy. I felt heavy because of everything going on in the world, everything going on here, everything going on in my heart. And I just felt the tremendous burden, and it became overwhelming. I mention this because I am not alone. I know I am not alone in this feeling. I know some days it just feels like it is all too much. And I wanted to get up here tonight like I did last week and say words of inspiration, remind us how even the littlest actions, the tiniest ways we can impact the universe for the better. And yet I struggled to reassure myself with those very ideas. And I reminded myself, after I navigated the woe to me, that sometimes you have to treat yourself with a little kindness, a little gentleness. That the fight is always going to be there, but sometimes you have to take care of yourself. This weekend we will be observing the national holiday in remembrance of Martin Luther King Jr., who famously said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." In a way, this feels like a reassuring quote, that even when things seem their darkest and most challenging, the universe will course correct. But in the words of Congresswoman Shontel Brown, that's not true at all. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. It only bends towards justice if we recognize this as an active exercise, not a passive one. We want justice. We have to work to bring about justice. And then this evening, as I was watching Alana light the candles, which is always a tricky exercise to prepare for Shabbat, don't worry, they can be tough to light. I noticed the light on the right side started off dim. And then as the flame kept moving, all of a sudden, it grew bigger, it expanded. Reminding me that even if I am heavy of heart, there is still a light. There might be a dim light at times, but it has the opportunity to expand, to lift up, to elevate our souls. How do we create that light? We remind ourselves of the sacred work that we are doing, that even in the face of hate and intolerance and suffering, there's much that can be done. And it may not all be fixed in our lifetime, let alone this week. But if we are working towards justice, the arc of the moral universe will bend towards justice. And more than that, when we are having difficulty lighting that light, lighting that fire, even as we spend our times in tears, we know there are others who can help us light that light and help make it brighter. Like Moses, we can feel heavy of tongue and heavy of heart. Like Moses, leadership can be a heavy burden. But like Moses, we are also reminded that when times seem darkest, we together can move mountains. So if you are feeling overwhelmed, you are feeling like you just can't get up and get going, know you are not alone in that feeling, and also know that as you stand up and as you rise, you are not alone in that endeavor either. Shabbat Shalom.